Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds got in pretty dang good shape for the Deadpool movie, the new Deadpool Wolverine movie. What they did with their diets is a little bit of a mystery, but I have a little bit of some context based on what they did before. And also, Ryan Reynolds' trainer, Don Saladino, is someone that I know. He's kind of in the same circle as myself and Dr. Gabrielle Lyon. So I know some of his approach, and I also know some of what he mentioned to GQ magazine in an interview, and I can extrapolate a little bit of that. Now, one of the first things that I want to touch on is Hugh Jackman notoriously ate 8,000 calories a day for the previous Deadpool movie, right? So he was really focusing on getting as much mass as possible. Now, when you got down to the nitty-gritty of his diet, it seemed as though the calories might have been a little bit overinflated in terms of his interview. He wasn't exactly eating 8,000 calories per day, if you ask me. He may have had some days where he was flirting with 8,000 calories per day, but without a little exogenous help, so to speak, that would be pretty hard to achieve. And I'm not even accusing Hugh Jackman of that. Whether there is some TRT in the equation or not, he certainly doesn't have the look of someone that's juiced to the gills. So I'm not making accusations or concerned with that. I'm more so trying to ascertain, like, what did he actually follow previously to get to 8,000 calories? And it seemed as though most of the meats he was eating were pretty high-fat meats, so it would have been possible to get the calories that high, although it seems unrealistic considering how lean he stayed in the process. Anyway, I want to get into the granular a little bit more. I want to start with Ryan Reynolds' approach, and we'll unpack sort of what he did and what Don Saladino, his awesome trainer, had him do. After today's video, I put a link down below for Seed Daily Synbiotic. That is a 25% off discount link. Seed is a prebiotic and a probiotic in one capsule. So you get a multi-stage delivery of the actual prebiotic and the probiotic. So essentially what is happening is proper colonization throughout the different stages of the digestive system. The prebiotic breaks down first, and then the probiotic and the strains within that break down later on in the digestive system. At least that's the idea behind it. So a lot of technology involved, and they publish a lot of clinical trials on their own product, but also on the microbiome in general. So I don't usually recommend a probiotic, but if I'm going to, it's gonna be one that's at least legitimately scientifically backed. So that link is in the top line of the description, gets you 25% off that Seed Daily Synbiotic. Check them out after this video.
I'm gonna do this the old-fashioned way, with 2 swords and maximum effort. Hear the music.
So I'll start with Ryan Reynolds' approach to the diet. And I'll go ahead and I'll pull up an interview with Don Saladino that he did with GQ. And I'm gonna read kind of an excerpt from that to start. It says, unlike the carb-conscious cutting mentality, Saladino says he has never shied away from carbs, instead opting for metabolic flexibility, manipulating macros based on external factors like the time of the year or how his body feels, but never restricting calories. He says you should not be living in a cut. People screw up because they start limiting calories and their bodies start basically shutting down. We're gonna unpack this a little bit. First of all, the metabolic flexibility piece, there is a lot to that. I appreciate what he's saying there. Metabolic flexibility means that you are focusing on the body running preferentially on fats at one time and preferentially on carbs at one time. So we can sort of elucidate from this that he probably has him doing some form of a carb cycling approach. Now, given that I do know Don, I don't want to put words in his mouth or assume, but I also do know, again, the circle that he swims in, and it's the same kind of circle that I'm in, where there are people that talk about that metabolic flexibility piece. I want to unpack a little bit of what that means in the case of maybe Ryan Reynolds, right? He's probably having him do some periods of relatively low carb, or at least periods of maybe some time restricted feeding to develop what is called fat adaptation. This makes it where your body gets really good at utilizing fats as a fuel source. And it's not so much like the keto way of thinking where you're saying like, hey, I'm priming the body to use fat. It's more so making it so that the body can utilize fats when you want it to and utilize carbs when you want it to. And a simple way to kind of describe this is, in an athlete, if an athlete is running or jogging at a relatively low pace, they're likely oxidizing fat as a fuel source at that point in time. If they were then to start breaking into a sprint or run up a hill, they would start oxidizing carbs at that point. Higher intensity is going to utilize more carbs. So when Saladino mentions that, hey, for Ryan Reynolds, I focused on metabolic flexibility, he's probably trying to make it so that when he's going into his workouts, he's utilizing more fat, and when he's going into more strength training style stuff, he's utilizing more carbs. Having that degree of metabolic flexibility can allow it so that you're better at using fat when it's time to use fat, and better at, say, building muscle or using carbs when it's time to put on muscle. And in a case like Ryan Reynolds, he was already in decent shape. He just needed to recompose, right? In fact, he actually mentions that in just a second. I'll read a quote from the GQ article again. As such, instead of aiming for a certain weight, Saladino focused on body composition. The number on the scale can be damned. He asked his clients, if I increased your body weight by 10 pounds, but you were able to look exactly the way you wanted to look naked, would you take it? So the point is he's focusing much more on recomposition. So for example, if I weighed the exact same that I weigh now, but I had more muscle, I had 10 pounds more muscle, I would absolutely opt for that. That would mean that I'd lose 10 pounds of fat and gain 10 pounds of muscle. So body recomposition is entirely doable. Now, I do know from the scientific literature that in order to do this, protein becomes a huge priority. So we can again elucidate that based on this, there was probably a degree of carb cycling, where he was going maybe a few days with higher carb, a few days with lower carb, and then there was likely some periods of time-restricted feeding, where he would go periods of time without food to get a level of fat adaptation and metabolic flexibility. But then we can also elucidate from this that he's probably keeping the protein pretty darn high. Because if you're going to drop fat and build muscle at the same time, which is absolutely positively doable, protein needs to be significantly higher. There's literature published in Nutrients, Journal Strength and Conditioning. There's a number of things that basically say the stimulus and the high protein is really what drives muscle preservation and potentially even muscle building, even in a caloric deficit. So we have a huge, huge play there to be able to drop body fat and build muscle at the same time. We just need to be aware of these things. Now, another thing that he mentions is Ryan was really doing some of his own stunts. He needed to keep energy levels high. Now, full disclaimer, I work with Hollywood types. I've worked with like Alan Richton and tough stuff from Reacher. Also a guy that moves a lot, and kind of learned the hard way with some of these things. Even when I was working with some other actors and big names, it was like, hey, if we decreased their calories too much, it was a recipe for disaster. They couldn't perform. So I love that Saladino takes this approach with Ryan Reynolds, say, hey, to get in shape, we need to move more and eat more. So way too many trainers in the mainstream world will say, move more and eat less. That is a recipe for disaster. That is a recipe for a crashed metabolism. There is such thing as energy balance, and there is such thing as G-flux, which I talk about on this channel a lot, meaning the more energy and food and energy in general we can move through a system, the better. I would rather that Ryan Reynolds consume 4,000 calories per day and burn 4,000 calories per day than consume 2,000 and burn 2,000. Happening at a higher flux is going to increase metabolic rate, and it's going to protect him from metabolic slowdown when he does reduce the calories. Now, I know what we know about Ryan Reynolds' diet for Deadpool and Wolverine does leave a lot to be desired. It does give us a basic playbook. And I want to look a little bit at what his workout looked like. I'm not going to go into workout detail too much, just so we have context of maybe what his diet looked like as it pertains to that. So according to that same GQ article, it was really like 60-minute weight training session. Wasn't anything crazy. I don't see anything about the cardio demands or what they were doing there. So as far as conditioning, I can't really comment. But 60 minutes of resistance training with a decent amount of volume, he probably had a fair bit of carbs in the system. And they were doing this kind of training 5 days per week. So if this was my sort of situation that I had my control over, I'd probably say, hey, let's carbohydrate backload after your workout and make it so that you're replenishing glycogen stores that way, but you're training in a depleted state. Now again, full disclaimer, I cannot speak for Don Saladino. I'll put a text message into him or DM him and kind of see if I can get some more insight. But at the end of the day, one of the ways that you potentially can improve metabolic flexibility is going into a workout fasted or at least depleted. So if you are depleted or in a fasted state going into a workout, what is called AMPK is higher, which means that you are more in a deficit, and that is triggering systems and processes to form adaptations that make you more efficient in a deprived or depleted state. This is one of the many ways to improve what's called mitochondrial biogenesis, where the mitochondria gets better at using fat and more efficient, once again, at switching back and forth between fats and carbohydrates.
What kind of monster are you? The Wolverine.
Okay, we're gonna pivot for a second. We're gonna go over to Hugh Jackman now. Okay, Hugh Jackman, again, used an 8,000 calorie diet to put on mass previously. If that was the case, he has a lot of wiggle room with a very high metabolism to be able to drastically cut calories and get shredded fast. And he definitely leaned out for this role, for sure. He looks really good. What's interesting is I'm gonna pull up some of his Instagram where he's got some posts. He really only showed a few pictures. He showed a picture of what looked like cod or sole or maybe haddock, some kind of a white fish with asparagus. And then he had another one where it was like cottage cheese and broccoli. So we're talking, like, I used to literally call this kind of diet like the green and white diet. It's kind of funny because I used to use it in contest prep for myself. I've used it in coaching clients a lot in the past. I don't coach clients anymore. The green and white diet. The green was there to get you satiated, to increase GLP-1, so you got at least a satiety effect, to at least get sulforaphane and the greens in. And then the white was like white fish, white chicken, cottage cheese, and fat-free yogurt. It was an aggressive diet. Now, it's interesting to compare the way that Hugh Jackman and Ryan Reynolds went. Ryan Reynolds went a higher fat, higher protein, moderate carb, metabolic flexibility sort of diet, whereas Hugh Jackman went what seems to be possibly a lower fat protocol. I don't really know much about his carbohydrate intake, although judging by things I've seen on his Instagram, I don't think he was squelching carbohydrates too much, but based on these pictures, it looks like he was. It almost looks like he was doing what I would call a protein-sparing modified fast. Now, you can see the thumbnail clip right here. I did a video a while back earlier in the summer about what I would do to get to 5% body fat by summer, like what I do to get really shredded really fast. And it is a variation of a protein-sparing modified fast, commonly known in the scientific community as literally rabbit starvation, because in the context of what they would use for these animal models is they would just give them protein and basically starve them of everything else. In the short term, a protein-sparing modified fast can be hugely effective. I have used it, again, with Hollywood types before, because it does drop body fat really fast, but it's something that you only do for a couple of weeks. And I'll link out to that video that I did on protein-sparing modified fasting in the first place so people have an understanding. But essentially, it kind of goes back to what I mentioned with Ryan Reynolds. As long as protein needs are met, you can drop calories pretty aggressively and you're not going to lose muscle, but you are going to slow down your metabolic rate. One of the biggest concerns that we have with this kind of situation is when you aggressively drop calories like we potentially did with Hugh Jackman. Again, I can't speak entirely with what happened here, is when you do have a cheat meal, your metabolic rate has decreased so much, the impact of that cheat meal becomes so much more significant. So let's take this for example. Let's say you cut down and you're eating 2,000 calories per day. Okay, and you were eating 3,000 calories per day. So you just cut down 7,000 calories in that week. Well, on Saturday, you go and you have a cheat meal that's 5,000 calories. Well, now your net deficit is only 2,000 calories for the week. You lost less than a pound. So did a lot of metabolic damage there, right? Well, I shouldn't say damage, but you did a lot of you canceled out a lot of your diet for the week is what you did. But then as time goes on, you end up reducing your metabolic rate more and more and more and more. So now that 2,000 calories doesn't really do much for you. So now you need to drop it to 1,500 calories. Well, you still have the same size cheat meal at the end of the week, and that cheat meal now takes up even more of your total calories for the week, so it slowed down your results even more. So the problem with these protein-sparing modified fasting protocols is that although they work so well, it does not give you the room to screw up because the margin for error is so much less. So you have to strategically bring calories back up. I think from a sustainability standpoint, Ryan Reynolds' approach with Don Saladino probably would work better. But again, Hugh Jackman is 55 and looks flippin' incredible. And I don't know everything that's going in there. But again, it looks as though it was the white and green or the green and white diet, where you've got the greens, the white fish, the white chicken, the cottage cheese, and the yogurt, and it works really dang well. So as always, keep it locked in here on my channel. I'll see you tomorrow.